Come on, let's start this special journey today. Now let's look at these creatures. Mushrooms are truly remarkable creatures. They are not animals, not plants, but something very different. Some mushrooms can be used as medicine, others as food, and some have extremely strong and dangerous toxins. However, perhaps you all agree with me that the most dangerous fungus on Earth is the one we are seeing on the screen. This is known as the first and only time humans used nuclear weapons in war. It was certainly a disaster, but it was not the largest nuclear disaster in human history. The biggest nuclear disaster we have suffered came from a power plant accident. It was an accident that raised safety concerns in the Soviet nuclear power industry, stalled its development for years, and forced the Soviet government to declare some confidential information. The disaster we are talking about is called the Chernobyl disaster. So how did that terrible disaster happen? Who is responsible for it, and what terrible consequences does it leave behind? All will be answered in today's video of Primordial Universe. You are watching the video Chernobyl Disaster, Who is the Criminal? As usual, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support the creators of this video. Don't go anywhere because we're starting right now. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant, named after V.I. Lenin, is located in the town of Pripyat, Ukraine, 18 kilometers northwest of Chernobyl, 16 kilometers from the border of Ukraine and Belarus, and about 110 kilometers north of Kiev. The plant has 4 reactors, each of which can produce 1 gigawatt of electricity and provided about 10% of Ukraine's electricity until it exploded when it encountered a problem. So what really happened on that fateful day? On April 25, 1986, reactor number 4 was scheduled to be shut down for routine maintenance work, and so it was wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to test whether the reactor's ability to self-generate electricity was possible. Does the reactor provide enough power for the reactor's safety system, especially the water pumps, in case the plant is cut off from external power sources? The reason for this is because reactors like the Chernobyl type have 2 diesel generators as backup, but they cannot operate immediately, so the reactor is used to drive the turbine. Once the battery is cut off from the reactor and runs on its own inertial rotation, it will continue to spin and generate electricity for a while longer. This power source is used to operate many systems, the most important of which is the cooling system. The purpose of this test is to check whether the turbines in inertial running mode can provide enough power for the pumps while waiting for the backup generators to start. But shouldn't people realize the risks from such an experiment? The answer is, of course, yes, but the risk is assessed as insignificant. This test was previously successful at another reactor with all safety standards. The turbines generate enough electricity in inertial mode to supply the pumps. Thus, the test is conducted sequentially in steps. The capacity of Chernobyl reactor number 4 was reduced from the normal level of 3,200 megawatts of heat to 1,000 megawatts of heat, so that testing could be conducted at lower energy levels and more safely. However, because of delays in the actual testing and errors by operators, capacity dropped too quickly, and the actual capacity drops to 30 megawatts of heat. Without having to understand too much, you probably know that the difference from 30 to 1,000 is too large a number, and it is definitely not a good signal. Sir, our reactor is dying, and it might create something not so good. I also see it creating something strange. Is it creating Godzilla? You guys can calm down and continue working. We'll continue testing as if nothing happened. Such a rapid reduction in power caused the concentration of xenon-135 nuclear formation product to increase. Of course, this substance does not create Godzilla. This product is usually only used in nuclear reactors in large power generation conditions, not in small capacity conditions like this. Even though they encountered a problem, the operators did not stop operating the furnace and continued to experiment. Furthermore, they decided to shut down the experiment and only increase the power to 200 megawatts to get rid of excess nuclear absorption. At 1:05 a.m. on April 26, as part of the experiment, water pumps driven by turbine generators were turned on. The water flow they create exceeds the level allowed by safety regulations. The water flow increases. At 1:19, I don't really understand the operating principle of this process, but it creates a very unstable and dangerous operating situation. However, it is worth mentioning that the unstable condition of the furnace was not shown in any way on the control panel, and perhaps no one in the operating team was completely aware of the danger of the disaster they may encounter. The power supply to the water pumps was cut off, and while they were running on inertial turbine generators, the pumped water flow decreased. The turbine is disconnected from the reactor, increasing the amount of steam in the reactor core. As the coolant heats up, vapor bubbles form inside the coolant stream. At 1:23 a.m., the operators pressed a button that controlled a reactor shutdown device, sending all the control rods into the reactor. It is unclear whether this was an emergency response or simply a routine measure to shut down the reactor once an experiment has been completed. After shutting down the turbine, the reactor jumped to 30 gigawatts, 10 times its normal operating capacity. The fuel rods began to flow and the steam pressure quickly increased, causing a massive steam explosion that blew off and destroyed the reactor cover, ruptured the cooling water pipes, and then blew away a chunk of it, bare. The fire spread everywhere in the factory, and the workers around the furnace died almost immediately. At 1:30 a.m., plant director Viktor Bryukhanov received information from the chemical department manager. He saw the explosion from his balcony, but could not contact the staff on duty. At that point, he quickly requested an alarm, but it seemed to be to no avail. Firefighters immediately approached the scene, but there was a fatal mistake. No one was equipped with radiation protection gear. "Attention guys, we have a small fire. Get dressed and do your duty." "You're the one staying on duty tonight, right?" "That's right. This is my home address. Please stop by tomorrow morning and tell my family that I love them very much." The firefighters were exposed to a large amount of radiation and immediately saw the consequences. Burns appeared on their faces, people doubled over, vomited, and gradually lost consciousness. At 1:55 a.m., the director went to the communications station and called Moscow for help. Meanwhile, Alexander Akimov, deputy director of the electrical department, sacrificed himself to pump hydrogen gas out of the reactor to avoid a more terrible explosion that could occur. He was transported to the hospital with severe burns, but immediately fled to continue assisting people. 11 days later, Lyashenko died. At 2:45 a.m., aware of the disaster, Bryukhanov, director of Chernobyl, proposed an evacuation, but was rejected because he had to wait for the council's opinion. As for the reactor, it continues to emit radioactive clouds that spread everywhere in the wind. A real disaster just happened. More than 3 hours after the explosion, police and local authorities blocked all roads leading into the factory. The hospital became overloaded. So many firefighters and radioactive workers were transferred to Ivanov, the nearest town. Some cases were transferred directly to Moscow. However, there was something very strange. For the people of Pripyat city, it was still a peaceful Saturday morning. People leisurely went fishing, children went to school, and soldiers appeared everywhere on the streets with masks covering their heads, holding radiation dosimeters. When asked, the answer was simply, just rehearsing. And this is the image of the children in the town still going to school the morning the disaster happened. However, it is clear that abnormalities have gradually appeared, especially at school. In front of each door is covered with a piece of wet cloth. Every sink had soap, something that had never happened before. The cleaning ladies run around the school, taking care of everything being clean. "Look, today we even have soap to wash our hands. It's good because maybe this afternoon we will be able to increase our meal to half a package of instant noodles." And of course, There are also rumors that gradually appear. But the story of the nuclear plant exploding is truly unbelievable. The teachers didn't say anything, and the students didn't feel worried at all. But in the second period, 2 women ran into the classroom and gave each student 2 small pills. The peaceful scene on the morning of the disaster gradually changed. At 11:40 a.m., at the riverport, workers from the reactor brought their families and crowded together on a train leaving the city. Just a few hours later, everyone knew there was a fire in Pripyat because the column of black smoke continued to rise. But strangely, no one panicked. People were still walking on the street, excitedly discussing the football match taking place the next day. Some people feel tired and go to the hospital, and the doctor prescribes them to drink water mixed with iodine. The factory director continued to request evacuation, but was once again denied. However, the resistance, that didn't last long. At 4:50 p.m. on April 26, 1986, Boris Sherbina, politician and deputy chairman of the Council of Ministers, and scientist Valery Legasov were in Kiev. These are the 2 characters responsible for dealing with the aftermath of the accident, and they only have a few hours to find out how the story is going. At this time, at Pripyat, dusk had fallen low, creating conditions for the sky above the reactor to look like it was on fire. People began to panic because even though there were no danger alarms, all over the streets were police and investigators with radiation concentration meters in their hands. The air became stuffy, as if the end of the world was coming. At 8:30 p.m., the meeting started. Chemical processing units and helicopters also arrived in Pripyat. Thanks to the helicopter, everyone finally learned the truth that the reactor had actually exploded. There was a reported nuclear reactor explosion last night. The reason for this delay was because no one had been able to approach it before, and everyone thought the explosion happened nearby, not from inside the furnace. Under pressure from the scientists, Sherbina had to fight a lot internally, and finally ordered the evacuation of the entire city the next morning. That morning, radioactive clouds spread everywhere. Leningrad and Moscow power plants recorded unusually high levels of radiation in the air. 1,250 buses, 350 trucks, and 2 trains appeared in Pripyat to evacuate 50,000 people. The urgent task now is to find a way to prevent radiation from spreading. Valery Legasov came up with the idea of dropping a special compound from above into the reactor to prevent the radioactive core from continuing to melt and causing greater consequences. As the vehicles rushed in, people finally realized what a scary situation they were in. The arrival of the helicopter caused radioactive dust to rise, and the situation became worse and worse. When the bus started moving, the evacuation process could not take place continuously, and people were forced to breathe those clouds of radioactive dust into their bodies. However, there was one thing worse than the radioactive fallout at that time, which was people. The news about the accident was hushed up. Only a small piece of news appeared. And there is no mention at all of the consequences for human health. Meanwhile, the young soldiers participating in the evacuation understood best, like Igor Hak, a soldier who joined the team to deal with the aftermath of the accident. He and his teammates built a pontoon bridge on the Pripyat River to help evacuate faster. After 2.5 months, his throat felt like it was on fire due to the effects of radiation. Igor is just one of countless nameless heroes who fell without anyone knowing. Throughout that summer, soldiers took turns dealing with the aftermath, burying empty villages and shooting down surrounding animals to prevent the risk of radiation from spreading beyond the quarantined area. By May 1st, thousands of helicopters continued to fly back and forth above the reactor, but the number of pilots still able to do this was now few and far between. Another day passed. The evacuation spread to 30 kilometers. Around Pripyat at this time, the first disaster response team to reach the scene died in the hospital. Doctors even had to wear lead shields to protect themselves from radiation emitted from the victim. But the disaster has not stopped. Even more terrible things lie ahead. What bad things are waiting for us? Isn't this the worst-case scenario? 10 days after the explosion, the engineers present themselves learned of a new, much larger threat. The initial explosion thinned the plant's water cooling system, causing a large puddle to form beneath the melting nuclear core. If the nuclear core were to reach that pool of water, it would cause a steam explosion. Experts analyzing the problem say the explosion could have had a destructive power of 5 megatons. However, the matter is not that simple. All the escaping water vapor will throw radioactive materials into the sky and will eventually spread to all of Europe and Russia. Soviet physicist V. Nestorenko commented that the explosion would make all of Europe a dead land. A 3-man suicide squad decided to wade through the half-flooded building to solve this story. This means they accept to sacrifice their lives and go on a suicide mission. They know that someone has to do this and that it is their duty as factory workers. They were warned that they would most likely die right under the capsule due to too high radiation levels. Those brave workers are Alex Ananenko, Valery Bespalov, and Boris Baranov. All 3 volunteered to carry out this suicide mission and were asked before dying if they wanted to change their decision or not. Ananenko was the most important person because he was the only person on shift who knew exactly where the valve was. Even though they are equipped with the best anti-radiation means, they still face great risks. Maybe, but the chances of survival for these 3 heroes are very small. All those who sacrificed their lives were equipped with flashlights to do their duty and were promised that, in case they died, the government would take care of their families because they were heroes. Firefighters tried to pump out some water before the heroes entered, so the water was only knee-deep. However, finding that valve in a hallway full of pipes and other valves was like finding a needle in a haystack. They are also pressured by time, because the longer they are down there, the shorter their lifespan, or the less chance they have of survival. These people became heroes because they not only saved Chernobyl from the worst explosion, but also Europe. There are still many inconsistencies in the fate of the 3 heroes. Most magazines and newspaper articles claim that they died a few hours after the mission. Some people said they managed to turn the valve, but no one survived and all died right in the chamber below the melting nuclear core. However, in a 2016 book titled Chernobyl 11-2340 by Andrew Leatherbarrow, the author said that it was amazing that all 3 survived so many years after the mission. Boris Baranov was the first of the 3 to die in 2005 from a heart attack. It's unclear whether the radiation he was exposed to during the mission had anything to do with his heart attack, but it probably wasn't because many years had passed. In 2015, Leatherbarrow found that Valery Bespalov was healthy and still working in the nuclear industry, whereas remedial work is still being carried out more urgently than ever. Miners and workers building the Kiev metro took advantage of this tunnel to install a cooling system for the reactor. At the same time, they built a wall to prevent radioactive fuel from entering the groundwater, spreading radiation to the Dnipro River and the Black Sea. A dam was even hastily built on the Pripyat River to further ensure that everything was under control.